It is called the thousand-year flood, not because it happens once every millennia, but because every year starts with a 0.1% chance that a flood like that can happen. A 100-year flood follows the same rule. There's a 1% chance every year that a devastating flood can happen. And as we've seen, despite these odds, these events still happen. Like the August floods that battered the Naugatuck River Valley. Today we're bringing on Nicole Klarides-Ditria, State Representative of the 105th District serving Derby, Beacon Falls, and Seymour, as well as Randy Collins, CCM's Associate Director of Public Policy and Advocacy, to discuss CCM's recent report on how to mitigate flood disasters in our towns and cities. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Randy, Nicole, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be here again.
So I want to start with you today, Representative. You and your family have a long history in the Valley. You know, your father was a well-known grocer and businessman around the area with the Klarides Shopping Center. Could you tell us a bit about your background and your connection to the area?
Well, like you said, it was my dad and his two brothers that opened up Klarides Supermarket in Seymour back in the 70s. And they learned the grocery business from their father, who had a corner store down the street from where they eventually opened up their supermarket. And my grandfather came here from Greece with my grandmother, you know, in search of what many of our parents and grandparents did, the American dream.
Yep.
They opened up a little mom and pop store in downtown Seymour. And then when they started their families, they decided it was time to expand. So they went down the street and built their first supermarket and shopping center in Seymour in the early 70s. And my parents always told my sister Themis and I, you know, this community has given so much to us and our family. We just want you, in whatever way you feel comfortable, to give back to the community. We were both involved in sports, you know, different civic groups in our towns. And we just Themis started, you know, being Board of Finance in Seymour, and then she had her run as state rep and minority leader for 22 years. And Themis constantly, when she basically from the first year she ran, said, Nicole, you should run. Nicole, you should run. I'm like, no, I don't need to do that. I will experience it through you.
That's your thing. Yeah,
that's your thing. It's not my thing. So fast forward, 20 years into her career. And one day I was going back and forth with her on some budget decision that she was doing up in Hartford. And I sent her and our then first selectman, Kurt Miller, a text. I said, I think I'm going to run. And they both respond, for what? And I said, you know, I think it's time. I need to run for state rep. I'm just not happy with the representation we have here in Seymour. And I think I can make a difference. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So just being around your sister all those years, you know, being the other side of the argument, you're like, I'm good at this. I should probably do this.
Yeah. And I was involved
in
local politics here in Seymour. I was on the Board of Selectmen. I was deputy first selectman for a little bit. So I got my feet wet a little bit.
You already kind of knew your way around a little bit. Yeah. One of the reasons we have you on right now, unfortunately, is that there were storms that deposited over a foot of rain on the Naugatuck River Valley. Where were you at that time and how that all pan out?
Well, it was, you know, as you know, that day it was raining during the day and we were all just going about our business. And I was supposed to have my family over for dinner on Sunday night around 5, 6 o'clock. And as it continued to rain all day and not let up, the first select woman in Seymour, Anne-Marie Dragonis, had called me and said, listen, I think I'm going to open up the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center in Seymour. I'm like, okay. And I'm just about to get ready to start dinner. I go, does that mean you want me to come down there? She's like, yes. so I said to my husband, you got to bring me down to the EOC. So, you know, I went down there and, you know, it started with the phone calls and the videos coming in. And we knew, obviously, it was raining all day and we had this torrential, you know, 8 inches of rain, but you didn't understand it until these videos started coming in and the 911 calls started coming in. The devastation in obviously the whole area, because it was, I likened it to, if you ever watched General Hospital in the 80s with the Cassidines, they made this fake storm that like hit Port Charles, where General Hospital took place. I go, someone is doing that to us in Seymour and Oxford and Southbury and that whole area.
It looks like it must be CG or something. It can't possibly be real.
It was just on us and didn't stop. It was, I thank God every day that my dad wasn't here to see this and his brothers, because it would have devastated and killed them. It was just all their hard work that they did all these years for this, their tenants in this plaza, and for us is just, we're almost starting from scratch now.
Was your home at least fine?
My home was okay, because I live up on a hill, but the plaza itself, it's just, we have 16 businesses and 13 are closed right now.
That's crazy. Yeah, I know, I, like you, I kind of woke up and like, oh, it's rainy, but I'm in New Haven. My parents are in New Milford. So I called them and said, hey, are you okay? They said, yeah, we're okay. But 67 is, New Haven to New Milford. That's the way I go every time. So to think about everything that happened there, like I'm so familiar with that route. It's kind of crazy to think about it. As you said, you're glad your dad didn't have to see that, but how did it feel to come out and survey the damage? Some estimates are saying it could exceed 100 million.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Unfortunately, in Seymour, our plaza was ground zero for most of the damage. And I don't quote me on the number, but I think we had maybe around 20 residents or so that were affected by the floods. But to see the videos that came through, they showed at one point the end of the plaza, there are 3 businesses, literally 6 feet high of water. You can see it through their businesses. The muck and the mud and everything on the ground, and things just like businesses imploded on each other. Like you saw nail salon stuff in the package store and just things floating all around. And we had one car in there. One person was stuck in a car early on. Thank God EMS got them out. Yeah. But I'll never forget those, because our dad always told Themis and I always talked about the flood of 55. And there's like, you don't know what it's like. We survived the flood of 55. We're like, well, Dad, we survived the flood of 2024. This is just, it was just as devastating.
Yeah, it was really crazy. You said in an interview that you and your sister Themis don't give up. It's not in your DNA. What does that mean to you in this moment?
Because our parents and our uncles taught us that, you're a Clarides. We don't give up. We have our plaza and our tenants, they're like family. And that's the way our dad and his uncles treated all their tenants back then. And that's the way we treat them. We went down there, they were crying, we were crying, every day. Someone's crying about something else just because it's devastating. This is their livelihood, and it's our livelihood. So as much as it affects them and their business, it's our small family business, and that's our legacy. It's day by day. We're figuring out day by day, waiting for the insurance company to come through to get these tenants back up and running and back to business as soon as possible.
So you're not going anywhere, you're rebuilding.
Oh no, we're definitely rebuilding. Yes.
That's good to know.
Not an option.
Not an option. Good to hear it. Now, Randy, we have you on because you are CCM's expert on flooding, which we'll get to in a second. But could you tell everyone at home just a little bit about what your role is at CCM?
So at CCM, I'm the Associate Director of Public Policy. And I think I've been in this role since 2012. I know my first day at CCM, actually, we got stormed out because that's the day that Superstorm Sandy hit. Okay. Might have been a sign of what's to come. And, I work a lot up at the Capitol. For the last few years, my main focus has really been on the finance and appropriations side of the policy side. So the budget, working a lot with budget and tax policy. But I was fortunate to get to pick up the phone one day when a stormwater permit was being issued, and got sucked into that. And ever since then, anything with flood or stormwater seems to keep coming back to me. So
got to do with water. Put it on Randy's desk, huh?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
oh, this is water. Yep, exactly. And so that's how I ended up working on the flood study, which the timing really, I mean, unfortunately, for the event that we had, it's unfortunate, unfortunate to
Yeah,
see an
but
event.
you started this like 2 years ago, right?
Yes, this is something we took on 2 years ago, and it started with at the time Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin
Hmm.
brought the issue forward to said, "Hey, we got to look at this." He's like, "I'm getting a lot of calls. I have garbage cans floating down the west end of Hartford."
Okay.
Um, and we realized that, following this, Superstorm Sandy and some of those events, we had looked at quite a bit at coastal flooding
Hmm.
and coastal resiliency, but we're realizing that we're seeing a lot more flooding events, inland, up, riverine and upland flooding, and saying, why is this going on? And what can we do? The frequency of rain events
Hmm.
it's increasing and the severity is increasing. And what can we do for our towns to mitigate some of this? Obviously, you know, there was no way, even if every recommendation in the report that we've just come out with had been in place, that you're not going to prepare for a 12-inch rain event in a few hours.
Yeah.
But you could have mitigated some areas along the periphery. Some areas could have been, you could have limited some of the damage.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how we have to look for it. We'll never completely prepare for everything, but how can we prepare better at our towns and our residents to equip, to deal with events?
Yeah. So obviously this is a complex issue, but what kind of work went into this study over the past 2 years?
So we contracted. I know my limitations, and while you might call me a flood expert,
Hmm.
I am by no means. I'm a simple lobbyist. But so we contracted with the engineering firm Fuss and O'Neill,
Hmm.
and they did work with Dewberry Associates and Resilient Land and Water. And they first started looking at what reports and studies have been done. Came out with a technical memorandum of what exists out there, and then they really went into stakeholder did a stakeholder survey of our municipalities. I think we had almost 90 responses, which for a fairly complex survey is a good return for us. And it really
Yeah.
represented all areas of the state, coastal, upland, urban, suburban, rural
Well, really
communities,
good
because they're all
sampling.
connected.
Yeah.
And it really gave us a lot. And from there, we came up with, as I said, with about 30 recommendations
Hmm.
that we should look at. And it's a combination of some stuff with the federal government, some recommendations that we're going to be bringing before the legislature. And there's also some local options that municipalities can look at in terms of some zoning options that they can take
Yeah.
without needing, anything from the federal government or the state. But
Things they can do right now.
yeah, almost best practices of how
Hmm.
they look at some of their zoning practices. Um, and again, every community is different. So it's, being conscious of one size doesn't fit all. But that's something that, we're looking to do. And I think the main takeaways, so that's how we came about
Hmm.
of this study. And as I said, I know literally releasing this a couple weeks after the August 18th storm, literally it was a coincidence, but it
Yeah.
helped focus and make, and bring attention saying, hey, you know what, this is an issue we've been looking at for a couple of years. And, hopefully we can make something positive out of that event and make some changes that can help our municipalities and our residents.
Yeah. I mean, we thought it was important enough to do a study on it, and it was a big problem, but the timing with it coming out right after this event, no one can say that, this is not something that we need to be aware of and prepare for. The important thing now is to talk about next steps. And the first question is, how do you begin? Can a town or city even plan for 1,000-year flood? In response to the report, we've seen some people say that this will affect mostly people around the water, but not only are there dozens of rivers in Connecticut, but we also risk the coastal flooding. How does this report cover for these different geographies and different types of flooding?
Well, I think, as you said, when you look at the report, I mean, we've incorporated the existing stuff, the existing recommendations from Circa and a lot of the other ones on
Mhm.
that, the coastal, but we didn't want to just redo an existing report.
Mhm.
So I think we were really looking at, and this again, I laugh at the term expert, but pluvial flooding. All right, I gotta Google that one.
Okay.
But that's flooding, a rainfall event, but not associated necessarily with like a river or a coastal area.
Okay.
It looks at drainage flooding. we continue to build out. We want new bike lanes. Hey, everyone wants to be able to bike to work, but we widen that road. That rain has to go somewhere. And every time we build something out, we expand our infrastructure, we build economic development, we build housing, which there's certainly a need for. Where is that rain going to go? And we have to start making sure that as we do these economic and commercial residential developments, road widening, that the infrastructure that we are putting in, that we have the infrastructure to handle that runoff. And it can't be done. There's things that towns can do. We have to look at the mapping. One of the recommendations is working with FEMA. Not all the maps are, some of the maps that we were looking at were up to 30 years old.
Okay.
And these still meet the, environmental and developed conditions where we are now. They don't look at that pluvial flooding that I just mentioned, or, some of the drainage issues. So we need to make sure we have up-to-date mapping where flood risk is, because that'll drive development. If you know that this is in a high-risk area for flooding, okay, you're not necessarily going to put new development in that area because of the risk. Or if you're in that path now where flooding is, are the residents aware that they're in a flood risk? Do they have the proper insurance? Because a lot of residents might all of a sudden get caught in a flood and realize that they've never needed flood insurance before.
Yeah, no, we heard with the recent flooding, a lot of people along the rivers didn't have flood insurance because why would they?
Right. And now they don't know that their insurance doesn't cover a flood, a flood issue, a flooding occurrence. So, these are the things that we need to work on. And certainly and also it's coordination between the state and municipalities. We had one town where they replaced a culvert, and that with a state STEEP grant, small town economic assistance program grant, and they couldn't coordinate enough with DEEP to finish about a 3-inch gap between a state-owned dam and their new culvert. And they didn't want to lose the STEEP grant, so there's a small gap where it wasn't done properly. And how do we coordinate those efforts? If we're going to take the steps to improve our infrastructure, how do we tie that in? Where the town didn't want to lose their STEEP grant, so they did it to the best of their ability. And I understand, our municipal agencies are understaffed. They're having a hard time hiring. It's the same thing with the state, but we need to make sure that these are a priority so that when we rebuild our infrastructure, we're not just building for the capacity we need today, but anticipating a growth of capacity and making sure that we're coordinating between DEEP and DOT and all those other agencies so we do it once and we do it right.
Definitely. Representative, is there anything that you would like to see happen in the legislature that would help high-risk areas to rebuild, or to even build for the first time infrastructure that would withstand at least 100-year floods?
I mean, we need to take a serious look now that we have this report from CCM, what we could do on a state level, what funds we can have become available for people that need them. I mean, even in Seymour, where our flooding was, it was the Little River, which is no longer the Little River. It was only 1.5 feet deep before the storm and 20 feet wide. During the storm, it was 16 feet high and 40 feet wide. So it completely, now we have beachfront in Seymour, which we never had because we've increased, we changed the
whole course of the river.
The course of the river forever. So, now our tenants never had flood insurance because they weren't required. So nothing was covered, to your point, like you mentioned, and now hopefully all these people will get some flood insurance. We had it on the plaza, thank God. That goes back to my dad and his brothers were always planning for the worst situation. So we were fortunate there, but now these people hopefully will, moving forward, get flood insurance that maybe they'll never need. But with the landscape of climates, things are getting bigger, stronger, and faster.
You can't trust that little river to stay the little river.
We need to prepare for it, because even if it's a small flood next time, not as devastating, it's still going to be water in someone's basement or something that needs to be addressed.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. There are proposals in this report that include partnership with the legislature. What does the ideal bill look like that would mitigate some of the concerns of flooding in these areas?
Oh, I don't even know where to start with that. I mean, that's a discussion I'm sure we'll be knee deep
hashing
in
out.
come
Yeah.
January. Yeah. I'm sure in partnership with CCM, we'll talk to them and figure out what will be the best steps forward and what legislation will help the people of Connecticut.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we look at, as I said, I mean, this study, when we looked at, what the needs of Hartford, or New Haven or big urban areas, aren't necessarily what's going to help for Thomaston. I mean, as I said, for a small state, we are very different communities with different capacities. We don't have a county government system. So I think the one thing we want to make sure is that we don't create a one size fits all model and just say, okay, every town's going to do this, because that's not what's going to work. And I know that we're going to be looking at, there's a new stormwater permit, which is a federal requirement that's being worked on by Deep right now that we've been in talks with. One of the main components of this stormwater permit is disconnecting impervious surface. Again, that road area, that sidewalk where the rain doesn't drop in and it runs off. And it's very expensive, and there's no money, for this. So one of the things that we're looking at is, can we almost set up, I know we have very successful brownfield remediation and redevelopment programs, some of the best in the country. Can we develop a grant, through bonding that towns can apply for, that can work for both stormwater compliance and flood mitigation? Almost you get a 2-for-1 bang on disconnecting some of those areas. And if you work to, increase the rain swells and rain gardens and remediate, because we have some areas where people will come in and build large parking lots, and they'll build some of this rainwater, stormwater infrastructure. But it's hard to get compliance 2 years, 3 years, because as rain floods, the grit, the sand, they fill up these areas. So in a couple years, they don't work any longer. How can we work to make sure what the requirements that when they build are still working in 4 or 5 years? And if they don't, again, that rainwater just runs, and we can't look at this as a town by town issue, because if I fix flooding in, say, West Hartford, does it just go into Hartford? So there has to be some regional work, and that's something that we can work with the COGs, our councils of government, which do a lot of the planning. But we need to make sure that that they have the capacity and the funding to say, okay, we can hire an engineer or a planner that can look at these things on a multi-town basis, to coordinate. As I said, water is going to flow someplace, and if you stop it in one town, we just don't want to funnel it to the next one and say, all right,
rivers don't recognize town boundaries or anything. Yeah, and as you said, we don't have counties, so you said that there is a role, you think, for the COGs, the councils of government, to kind of work with these areas.
Absolutely. As I said, you have to, if you fix something in Derby, how does it affect Orange, or vice versa? Or you build up everything in Waterbury, it's just going to push that water down downstream. So we need to make sure that everything, it doesn't just cascade, but that we are a very small state, and that we need to be able to talk across agencies, across governments, government lines, to address this. But it's not if it was an easy solution, we would have done it. And one of the things I think we really like about the report, while there's 30 recommendations in there, there and abouts, it's not a report that you have to pass them all. We can pass 4 or 5 this year and then build on the 4 or 5 as we go forward. This is going to be a multi-year process, and and it's also going to be education for residents to understand what you're doing. No one wants to pay more, but when they can see, okay, if I have to pay something additional, this is what it's going to fix, and that it's tangible, and it's just not going into a general fund. But that's also, it's a matter of education at the state and local level to talk to residents and say, hey, we have to fix this. Otherwise, you know what? You can't use your basement because every time it rains, it's going to get flooded. You're going to call the town. We're going to help you pump it out, and you're going to do it again. I think residents, if they can get a bang for their buck and understand what that is, we're willing to step up. But it's again, it's a partnership. Towns can't do it alone. We're going to need help from the state, from the federal government. But we also understand that it's not just going to be a handout, but everyone has to have a little skin in this game.
But also, too, I have a question. I know we've talked about, and now a lot of people are mentioning how FEMA hasn't updated their flood maps in some areas for like 30 years. Now, I thought they're supposed to update them like every 5 years. I don't understand how all of a sudden you're having areas that haven't been done in 30 years. That seems not surprising, but still surprising to me.
I think, I'm assuming that it's a matter of capacity, with just like every other, a lot of things are supposed to get updated on a more frequent basis. And I think they probably focus on what they look at or what assumed would be the most critical high risk areas and focus. But as we see again, that increased rainfall with a higher intensity, and more water coming in a short period of time, that some of these areas that weren't considered at risk are at risk. And that, I think that's why we need to look. And we're going to be working through NLC, the National League of Cities, our national counterparts, working through our federal delegation. We're sure we're not the only state dealing with this.
Right.
And it's one of those, does FEMA have the capacity? I mean, you look at everything that they've been tasked with over the last few years. And how do we work with them to address, and make sure the mapping's up to date and moving forward. I mean, there's a lot of technology out there with all the, satellite technology. Is there a way to partner? And even if it's not that FEMA side, can we contract with a private entity that has this capacity and this mapping? I'm sure it's already done someplace. It's just a matter of compiling it into data that we can work with.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't want to just depend on the government. As I said, a lot of times, for insurance purposes, I guarantee there are companies that are doing this right now and that have that data. And it's a matter of, again, taking that data into workable reports that we can use.
Yeah. So we're talking about partnerships and all that stuff. Representative, have you been talking with other leaders in the Valley, other towns, other state reps? And what are you hearing from your,
Well, they're all saying the same thing, that it's a conversation that we need to be serious about. Mm-hmm. And certain people, have mentioned it and over the years, but I think now, because of this huge flood and CCM's report coming out, there's more of that exclamation point on it. And it's in the forefront because so many people suffered from it this time. And I think it's something that we'll be talking about for many years to come. And like Randy said, with 30 recommendations, you need to do a little bit at a time. Mm-hmm. and start checking off that list and do everything we can. We're never going to stop floods, but if we can mitigate it just a tiny bit, that's the difference between maybe someone being closed for business or out of their house for a couple of weeks versus months.
Yeah, and I think that's important to look at. Like, this recommendations we have aren't just quick fix. It's mm-hmm. a commitment to changing the way we do certain things for the future.
Yes.
If we took all of those 30 actions, would we be prepared completely for flooding, or are they still going to wreak havoc? Is it just a matter of degrees of being prepared?
Even if we had all 30 recommendations in place, we still would have seen significant damage. You're never going to prepare for a 12-inch plus rain occurrence in that shorter period of time. We're not building that type of resiliency. It's just beyond the capacity of what we are. As devastating as it was in the Valley, we can also look, if that had occurred closer to Norwich, where there's an at-risk dam in Basra, what would that have looked like? And we have to look at some of those. What's the capacity of some of these old dams? This is a lot of, it's an old mill state. And a lot of small dams.
That in this study?
Yes, there are recommendations to start looking at dams, and we might have to prioritize, and we're going to have to prioritize areas, because I know it was earlier in the spring that we were very worried about, as I said, that Basra Dam. And if that had fallen, what would have occurred downriver? I mean, you would have seen an even more catastrophic event. So can we ever prepare for 12 plus, mass, 12 plus year? No, but you can mitigate the impact. Maybe you can, instead of having, damage over, square miles, it's more confined, or some of the infrastructure you have is hardened so that you're not seeing as much damage and you're more resilient to it. So will we ever stop flooding? No, but we can make sure that we are better prepared to handle it, and that when we do have flooding, we limit, the impacted areas.
Yeah, that's interesting talking about the dams because so many of our towns, especially in the valleys, the old industrial things are built right along the river where you had that water power.
Mhm.
And yeah, we don't think about them. We walk past them, think they're pretty, maybe skip a rock on it most of the time now because they're not active, but there's millions of gallons of water hiding behind those things. And if they went in a flood, it would be bad news.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and a lot of them are privately owned. I mean, it's understanding, like, are they being inspected?
Hmm.
Uh, and if you went to a resident and said, "Hey, by the way, you own 10 acres of land and there's a dam somewhere in there," they might not have the capacity or the fiscal, the financial ability to repair a dam.
Yeah.
It's not, "Hey, I need to replace a sidewalk." I mean, it's a engineering and permitting. And
And I'm sure
do we
some of
have
these are like basically in the woods at this point too.
Absolutely. And do you have so in those cases, what can we do to assist? Because you don't want a resident just to ignore it because, hey, everything's expensive these days. And, when all of a sudden you say, "Hey, you got a dam, you need to fix that." All right, well, I also got to pay my electric bill. I got to put food on my table, gas in the car. I'm worried about my prescription. I have a lot of other costs. Is that the one I'm going to not think about first?
Yeah.
Because it's not, on the forefront. So is there a program to help residents who might have owned these properties for years, and you're right, never thought about it, or maybe that wasn't classified as a dam at risk when they bought that,
Yeah.
where it is now. So we don't want people to ignore that risk, simply because of the cost associated. So that's some of the areas where we can work with the state to say, okay, we can create a program to help before it becomes a bigger problem for more residents.
Yeah. So it's smart to talk about resiliency at any time, obviously. And it's not going to help the folks, unfortunately, that were just affected. But what are their next steps? What are we doing to help these people rebuild after the disaster? Representative?
Well, what the state of Connecticut had offered some DECD grants
Mhm.
to affected businesses that they applied for, and the turnaround was pretty fast. It was $25,000 grants. People were able to apply for it on a Friday morning, and then most of them got it within a week or so
That's great.
of applying, which was great. So listen, any little bit helps.
Hmm.
So that money, it went directly to the businesses. And as you know, FEMA money only goes to homeowners.
Hmm.
And that's typically not even a lot of money. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. Some of our businesses will do, maybe the SBA loans,
Hmm.
the low interest loans. I also think that I heard through Senator Blumenthal that another small business type loan through
Hmm.
FEMA, even lower than the SBA, may be coming out. So I think people will be taking advantage of all of those. I believe
Yeah.
myself and our family plaza as well, because we will need more money to rebuild.
Yeah. We talked about, the state and federal and everything helping out what the towns can do. But just out of curiosity, is there stuff going on within the community?
Oh
Charities
yes.
and
Oh,
organizations coming out of the woodwork to help?
it's always amazing in times of trouble how the community always comes out to help. We had various fundraisers, and GoFundMe pages for different businesses. People have stepped up and donated. Team always seems to be, our go-to organization with David Morgan at the helm. So people made donations to Team, and then Team is distributing it to people as needed. There's a couple big fundraisers coming up within the next couple weeks. We had in Seymour one of our own, Jake Blue, who's a
Hmm.
country music singer. He
Yep.
did a fundraiser and he donated half of his proceeds to Seymour and half to Oxford. So it's heartwarming and just amazing that
So
people
people
just
are coming together to help. That's great.
yep, do whatever they can to help these businesses and the homeowners get back on their feet.
Randy, do you have hope that some or all of these proposals that we have are met with open arms after the flooding?
Yeah, as I said, we've already been in contact. We've already had outreach from, yeah, as I said, groups like Save the Sound, CIRCA, which is Climate Infrastructure Resilient, Connecticut Infrastructure Resilient and Climate. One of those groups we've had from DEEP, OPM, because again, a lot of these recommendations have been through the legislature in the past, and how can we coordinate our efforts? It doesn't have to be, and quite honestly, I don't want one giant CCM standalone bill because
Hmm.
it just bogs it down. But if we put different pieces through Planning and Development Committee, through the Finance Committee, through the Appropriations Committee, there's a better chance that we get more of those passed, because when it becomes a single standalone, a lot of times it becomes an all or nothing process. And well, people don't like this aspect, so the whole bill tanks because of one or two sections. So, we don't, again, CCMs, we're not looking for credit for this. We just want to move the ball forward. So, we're very, optimistic about the, making progress. And I think between the report, the events on August 18th, but again, we've seen this type of flooding. This was spurred a couple of years ago in Hartford in the North End. So it's not just, you don't need a 12-inch rainfall to see fairly catastrophic flooding. And what are we doing to make sure that we're coordinating on all those levels? And it's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. Flood doesn't care, who your state rep is, or, what color your town votes for. And it doesn't really matter, even beyond the idea of like, is this climate change? Is it not climate change? We're having more rain, regardless of the reason. It's more frequent and it's at higher intensity. And we either work together to fix this and mitigate it as we move forward, or we end up just having to pick up the pieces, after each event. So I think the legislature realizes, from the feedback I've gotten so far, yes, we're going to do something on this. And again, the good thing about the report, it's not a one size, you either get it or don't get it. We can take a few pieces. We can wait a couple years for another couple pieces.
Every little one of those components could help.
And we can build on that. And I think that that's the better way. This is the land of steady habits, but I'm happy. I'm thinking that steady progress is better than, an all or nothing. So that's what we're hopeful for this session.
Excellent. And Representative, kind of want to finish up the show with you. And one thing we always like to do at the end is talk about the future and how you're feeling. So when you think about the Valley and your connection and the businesses and the people, how are you feeling about the future? Are you feeling optimistic about your town and your region?
Yes, I am. Like I said before, besides my sister and I having the philosophy that we won't give up, the Valley doesn't give up. And for that matter, Connecticut doesn't give up. We're going to do whatever we can as residents and as a legislature to move our state forward. We'll get through this devastation. We'll do it together. We'll get money wherever we can, whether it's donations or, from FEMA or the state of Connecticut. But each individual person that was affected by this knows someone else. It's 6 degrees separation. There's always someone that that was affected by this. And we're going to hear this for years to come. And this will be, Themis and I say, this will be our dad's flood of 55. We're going to talk about this with our kids and everybody. And hopefully every year, every other year, we'll get more and more of these recommendations in place and just do what we can to mitigate it as much as we possibly can. Because like you said, we're never going to stop a flood. You can't do anything about 12 inches in 8 hours. It's just impossible. But if we can mitigate it even a tiny bit, that would mean difference between devastation to more people and hopefully a little bit less.
Well, let's all hope that that's the way it goes. Well, Representative Klarides-Ditria, Randy, thanks for joining us today on the show.
Thank you.
The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Joseph Thornton is our executive producer. Christopher Gilson is our producer. Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.